precisamos falar. Ok.
Since we have just 1 hour for this session, uh, before I hand over the session to Professor Arvind Kumar, I would just like to share a very brief introduction of our keynote speaker. Professor Arvind Kumar is not new to the Institute, for he had
the first the knowledge, and then I'll come to the indigenous knowledge. The first book was by Austrian sociologist Keynote Speaker, which was published in 1999. And I recall that when I was with Central University of Himachal Pradesh, Dharamshala, I made it sure that this book should be in the library, and this was in the library, and still this is in the library. This is the one typical scientific, perceptions, understanding of knowledge. And the name of the book is The Epistemic Culture, How the Sciences Make Knowledge. So you can say so from the objectivist point of view, objective realist point of view. The second one, written by none other than Keith Basso, who is considered the one of the giants in this field as far as the indigenous knowledge is concerned, from the epistemic point of view. Wisdom sits in places, landscape, and language among the Western Apache. Anyway, we need to understand that why today this world, particularly the academic world, is talking so much about indigenous knowledge. All right, what is going to happen? Like, for example, even the topic that I chose to speak, indigenous knowledge, dialogue, democracy, and pedagogy. What is the reason behind that? Is there any reason? I find a number of reasons. The first, to have the proper voice and the say in the overall educational discourses at the theoretical level as well as at the praxis. Second, that the whole concept of knowledge, what knowledge is and what knowledge is not, how knowledge is conceptualized, how knowledge is imparted or constructed, and how to legitimize a particular knowledge, that's also a bigger question. The second, as far as the knowledge construction is concerned, or knowledge in the heuristic framework of a reference, knowledge imparting is concerned, pedagogy is considered one of the tools. So you will go by the traditional definition, or the old, I should say, the old definition of pedagogy. Pedagogy is a science of teaching, isn't it? So to have knowledge, to create knowledge, to develop knowledge, or to construct knowledge, you need to have some devices and tools with the help of which a generation transfers its knowledge to another one. A teacher transfers his or her knowledge to the students. I'm not entering into a debate whether knowledge can be transferred or not, knowledge can be created or not. Knowledge can only be constructed, as people talk in a constructivist paradigm of teaching, learning, and knowing. Today, I'll take a different standpoint, that why all of a sudden you will find people have started talking about this. I would like to take you into the landscapes of the various people who have worked in the area of the beautiful relationship that exists between the knowledge and the education, and knowledge, education in the largest discourses of democracy through the modes of dialogues, and pedagogy, as I said, one of the tools. But today I'll take a different standpoint. Pedagogy is not a tool in the process of imparting knowledge. It's much more than anything else, friends. Why am I saying that? See, if you look at around, you'll find that the human being is trapped into not one, two, or three, but the many constructs. So, world in which a particular human being belongs to I and you or anybody else, this world itself is appearing as a construct. Why I say construct? Because almost all perspectives in the different nations, different cultures, different climate, in all times and climes, you'll find that people are projecting that, okay, the world in which you are living is a real world. And this is the world where you have to liberate yourself, you have to realize yourself. Fine, I have no problem with that. But when it is said this is the construct in which you have to operate, that is a problematic. And here comes the role of education in a given democratic setup. And the role of liberating oneself, like in Indian thought system also, it is said, sa vidya ya vimuktaye, right? Similar kind of things have been suggested by, famous pedagogues of the world, famous educational thinkers who have contributed significantly in the larger discourse of education. Similarly, what has happened that today there is a deliberate attempt to present even culture as a construct, world as a construct, civilization as a construct, culture as a construct, a human being, the concept of human being as a construct, and that's why I say human construct. And so my journey will be from the human construct to the cultural construct, and from cultural construct to, I'm not saying in the sense of whether a particular cultural construct is good and a particular cultural construct is bad, but the culture is a culture per se. So cultural context, and then in that cultural settings, the educational construct. See the kind of educational construct that is advocated today, even with the reference to higher education, problematic, because people are saying that this is the world in which we are living. Only those human beings will survive and make a contribution who can be skill oriented, whatever the knowledge oriented, etc., etc. And then the epistemic construct. Sometimes you will find these epistemic constructs in the different part of the world appeal to us as the symbol of epistemic violence. That my epistemic understanding of the knowledge and reality is superior or far better than any part of the world. So the hegemony of epistemic hegemonies you will find all over the world. And then definitely I'll come to the indigenous knowledge, and lastly, the democracy. See, I made a point that in a society, particularly take the Indian culture, and in modern context, we all consider ourselves as a democratic, we are living in a democratic setup. And in this democratic setup, 2-3 things are fundamentals of this democracy. I am reminded of 2 famous works, one done by the Theory of Justice by none other than, the person who oriented even Amartya Sen to political philosophy, Rawls. And the second work I'm reminded of, and the name of the work is The Idea of Justice. Last time also, when I was given an opportunity to deliver my lecture in NERIE, which I'm missing this time by my physical presence due to certain compelling situations, I did mention these 2 works. That the ultimate aim is to provide justice to all human beings, number 1. Number 2, enlargement of human choices. When I'm saying enlargement of human choices in a particular democratic setup, it means every human should have freedom to choose what he or she wants to do in one's life. And the third, ultimately, to liberate oneself. And that's why I quote it in the Indian cultural context as well. So the universal human conception, as presented by many thinkers who have extensively worked in the area of pedagogy and the larger discourse of education, It stems from the conception of the process of liberation as a process of humanization, contrary to the spiritual context of India, where liberation means you become one with the supreme soul, right? But you'll find the Western context, particularly the Latin Americans, and even some part of the European and American context, that the universal human conception presented by these thinkers have stemmed from the conception of the process of liberation as a process of humanization. So the point is that anyone can break free from the shackles of dehumanization. And it is an important element in the optimistic component of educational discourse in general and pedagogic discourse in particular. So according to the basic premise of this educational discourse, there is no absolute historical fact that person cannot change. So history and reality are shaped by human beings. If that's the case, then don't you think even our conception and understanding of knowledge is also shaped by us only? So if history and reality are shaped by human beings and allow them a degree of humanization, or it could be a source of dehumanization as well. So this perception emphasizes that the historical fact that assumes that person is capable of realizing his human destiny within the context of a human society, as in our context, our society, particularly from the political point of view, socio-political arrangement point of view, it's a democratic society. So the existence of human context gives a human the possibility of controlling his life and, in general, the possibility of realizing his humanity within this context. So another basic premise, as an essential principle and even a necessary condition for the realization of universal humanity and its integrity, is freedom. So freedom of what? Freedom to think, freedom the way I want to live my life within socio-cultural ethics and moral paradigm. And as I said, freedom of choice. So similarly, you'll be surprised that this concept is perceived by even great thinker like Freire as of great importance, which enables a person to realize his human destiny and inevitably leads to the recognition that this right, what is this right? The right to be human applies to all human beings. And this recognition of this right allows a person to fight for a change in the given objective reality and to create a new situation that allows the search for a more complete humanity. So if you don't recognize the indigenous knowledge, the way it is perceived, the way it is realized, the way it is conceptualized, and the way it is transacted among fellow human beings, right? Don't you think it is an injustice? Which is contrary to the democratic setups. So, many thinkers have emphasized that in the absence of freedom, the individual is deprived of the possibility of realizing his human wholeness. And thus, the mechanisms of reproductions are given within the socio-political context to oppress the individual and lead to dehumanization that distorts his or her world and even his or her humanity. So when you say, okay, this is the concept of knowledge, or this is the knowledge which is only valid knowledge, all these concepts are anti-democratic. So this situation, why I'm saying this, because this situation leads to the loss of the individual's ability to shape his or her identity and leads to the limitations of his or her level of consciousness and the enslavement of his or her will within the ideological context which serves the interest of ruling hegemony. So, because the source of hope for the liberation and humanization of the context is not in political revolutions as generally it is perceived, but in human consciousness, and that's why education has become a central component in the possibility of its realization. If I want to actualize or I want to realize my potential as a human being, I should have all the space for that. I should have all the opportunities for that. I should have freedom to do that. And that's why one of the thinkers has declared the importance of existence of a critical consciousness among human beings as the oppressive reality, as a necessary condition for the realization of the human destiny. That is, in order to realize universal human emancipation, human beings must be equipped with the means necessary to ensure this belief. So this process requires, friends, wholeness in thought and action together, and involvement in the struggle for liberation and full humanization. Why I have made this point? I made this point with certain understanding. I would like to assert, friends, that in such an emancipatory and democratic process, the community of learners and researchers form different cultural groups, are involved in a dialogic pedagogy, and thus can become activist citizens, challenging the inequality between them and the social world around them. So, when some people say that that political party in that particular era, in a particular geographical context, brought the agenda of social justice, I don't become agree with that. The moment you use such a powerful concept like social justice, the way it has been applied, you will find it is highly problematic. Not only in the case of the Aboriginal people, but even in the case of the people who are not the part of that world. People like me and you. So in this case, first let's try to discuss that how knowledge has been conceptualized and why it is necessary today in our educational planning through its curriculum, pedagogy, and different modes, give a space to the change perception of what knowledge is all about from the indigenous point of view. And when I'm saying indigenous point of view, I'm not saying only from this tribal point of view or that tribal point of view. That is there in a given culture. Of course, even this statement can be contested one. I know, I'm fully aware of that. But still, so the first, the things that are presented to us in the form of knowledge, how far that is in knowledge from a particular epistemic point of view, and how far you can say, no, this is not a knowledge from another or other's epistemic point of view. Look at today's understanding of the concept of knowledge. I, being a student of epistemology, like many people always ask, okay, what do you think? What is knowledge? If you talk in terms of old Greek paradigm of understanding of epistemology, people will say that knowledge is adequate representation of a state of affairs. So is knowledge an instance of an adequate representation of a state of affairs? And here adequacy means that there is some sort of conformity between the mental representation and what is represented. So suppose I have a particular concept of the chairness, and that concept, when I translate into reality in terms of concrete chair, and if both conform each other, then we say, yes, this is knowledge. But suppose if I say that, no, that's not the knowledge. If not, then what is it? So the working framework nowadays is propositional, not representational. It is a propositional. And knowledge is rather conceived as a propositional attitude. And in that perspective, when one knows something, when one has a particular attitude towards the truth of a propositional content. Now let me allow to go back. When I made a point that knowledge, it could be mathematical knowledge, it could be scientific knowledge, it could be social science knowledge, it could be humanistic knowledge, or it could be technological knowledge or anything else. That when you say it is a representation of a state of affairs, representation of the mental world. So do you think the mental world of human beings belonging to all different cultures of the world will remain same or is same? No. So my mental space is shaped by my cultural space. Your mental world will always be shaped by your cultural space. And that's why I congratulate the entire team of NERIE who conceptualized that it is right time to think and discuss, deliberate, so that we can incorporate judiciously in our educational discourses in general and our pedagogy and curriculum in particular. That what is it that qualifies indigenous knowledge as a way of knowing? Can it be done through dialogue or dialogic pedagogy? Can it be realized in a given democratic setups? And if it can be done, then what will be the mode of that pedagogies? So friends, let me come back to the North Satina's work, the title of the book, The Epistemic Culture, to recognize that there are radical differences in the way in which indigenous people conceive and construct knowledge, or group of people who belong to a particular cultural setup. There is a radical difference. Like women as a group of Meghalaya, and the concept of women as a group in other part of the country, you can take example from Bengal, or you can take example from Madhya Pradesh or Chhattisgarh or Rajasthan or Uttar Pradesh. Do you think even the concept is same? Forget about their roles and rights. I'll say no. And that's why Meghalaya is one of the epitome in India as the epitome of women empowerment. If you look at the cultural practices in that state, you will be surprised at whom you call Aboriginal people, the tribal people, how powerfully they conceptualize that how to give a respectable place in the whole socio-cultural dimension of a particular reason. And for me, sometimes it's amazing in India. It's amazing. So furthermore, it is a constructed, the concept of knowledge, it is constructed on the basis of a collective dynamic that permits the confluence of the elderly and children,
Yesterday I keep on folded here. What folder was here? But I left it study.
A network problem, so we are waiting for the keynote speaker again to join. So please bear with us. It was such a powerful and enlightening session. So if you have any questions, any queries, you can please put it in the chat box. or you can just write it down for the students who are present here. And at the end of this, maybe we can have some time of interaction with Professor Jha. Delegates, because of the technological snag, we will just have a short break now. And after that, again, we will continue with the session at 10:40. Because Professor Jha is also one of the panelists in the session, which will happen just after the session. Okay, so we will just break now. And for those who are present here, a cup of tea is waiting for you just outside the auditorium.
Friends, welcome to this session on family discussion. I request all the participants, students outside should enter into the hall so that we can start this session. So let me start this session. Esteemed Principal Professor Bhattapur, Professor Rai, the Program Coordinator, all the dear students, delegates, faculty members from this institute, and ladies and gentlemen. So this is an important session, and we have in the panelists 7 eminent scholars. They will be talking on different aspects of the main theme of the seminar, that is on indigenous knowledge, integration of indigenous knowledge in school curriculum. First of all, let me tell you why this theme assumes importance and why this has been thought of as a theme of the seminar. It is because throughout the national education policy, this indigenous knowledge, integration of indigenous knowledge, not only at school level, but across the stages of education, starting from preschool to higher education, technical education, professional education, including teacher education, has been highlighted. Across the stages and across the curricular areas, curricular activities and curricular subjects like history, mathematics, science, and so on. So, briefly speaking, or in a nutshell, indigenous knowledge is a distinctive understanding rooted in the cultural experience of indigenous people. And mostly, if we say indigenous people, as yesterday it was discussed that it is a very comprehensive concept. We all are indigenous in essence. We all are indigenous in essence. Only and mostly, we are also all tribals. We all are tribals. Only some have been scheduled in the constitution, that we call them scheduled tribes. Otherwise, in a sense, all the Indians are tribals. And as you know, there are different nomenclature like traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, aboriginal knowledge, tribal knowledge. We use all these terminologies interchangeably, and indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge or tribal knowledge or aboriginal knowledge, they find their expression in our culture, stories, legends, folklore, rituals, songs, laws, language, dance, games, mythology, design, visual arts, architecture. So all these are these are the reflections. These are the sources through which they find their expression. And you see why this indigenous knowledge has been highlighted in our national education policy. It is said that we can transform India by transforming our education system. So what is transformation? It is not simply changing our education system. It is a transformation. But the difference between change and transformation, I just give you an example. When a caterpillar, you must have all seen caterpillar, it becomes a butterfly, it's called a transformation. Like one, you must have heard from Ramayana, Dasyu Ratnagar, or Dakat Ratnagar became Rishi Valmiki. This is a kind of transformation. So, similarly, we can bring about a revolutionary change in our education system. That is what is called transformation. And it is said that one of the vision is that an education system rooted in Indian ethos that contributes directly to transforming India, that is Bharat. From India to Bharat. So, if you want to transform India in the field of economy or in any other field, then you have to transform our education system. That is one of the visions of our national policy on education. And if you go through different chapters and different paras of national education policy, you can find in most of the places this indigenous integration of indigenous knowledge has been reflected. One you can see in from para 4.27. Knowledge, Indian knowledge system, including tribal knowledge and indigenous and traditional ways of learning, will be incorporated in scientific manner throughout the school curriculum. Not only school curriculum, but also higher education system. And para 4.29, curriculum and pedagogy from foundational stage onwards will be redesigned to be strongly rooted in Indian and local context and ethos in terms of culture, tradition, heritage, customs, traditions, philosophy, and so on. Then another thing it says that local person can be hired, para 5.25. Local persons can be hired to teach at school or school complexes for the purpose of promoting local professions, knowledge and skills, local art, music, agriculture, business, sports, carpentry, and other vocational crafts. And it also talks of in 11.1 para, so it refers to Kadambari, Banabhata's Kadambari, talks about 64 arts, knowledge of many arts, 64 colors, and this must be brought back to education. So we are discussing about indigenous knowledge in a at a juncture when many of the youth of the country is attracted towards Western culture. So this is the beauty of our education policy, and it also talks about how the teachers also what is the role of the teacher. Teachers must be grounded in Indian values, language, knowledge, ethos, and traditions, including tribal traditions. So if you see the indigenous knowledge, most of the indigenous knowledge have borrowed from the indigenous people. They are called tribal people. And another in 16.5 it says Lok Vidya. What is the Lok Vidya? Lok Vidya, that is the important vocational knowledge that is developed in India. So vocational knowledge that is developed in India and mostly by tribal people will be made accessible to students through vocational education courses. In vocational education also, that this indigenous knowledge should be integrated. So I am not going to tell, there are so many paras also further where this has been, indigenous knowledge has been highlighted. Today, we have 7 eminent speakers. They are prolific speakers in their own areas. So, in order to make it focus, I collected their opinion on which area they wish to speak. And we have with us Professor Ashish Srivastava, who is from Mahatma Gandhi National University. I'll be, of course, introducing them by the time they speak. Will be also chairing this session, and Professor K. Pushpanandan from MS University, Baroda, Professor Arvind Kumar Jha from IGNOU, New Delhi, Professor Sara Sinha, our NCERT from our NCERT fraternity, head teacher education, and Professor P.C. Agrawal, one of the heads of our RI Bhubaneswar, and Professor Y. Srikant, principal, also is principal RI Mysuru, that represents Western India, and Professor Manoj Saxena from Central University of Himachal Pradesh. So, as they have told, they will be speaking on their area of interest. I have collected. Professor Ashish Srivastava will be talking on indigenous knowledge and language, and K. Pushpanandam will be talking on integration of indigenous knowledge and use of technology. Professor Arvind Kumar Jha, who was also one of the speakers in the previous session, but he could not complete due to some technical error. He will be talking on indigenous knowledge in Indian thought system and its relevance for contemporary classroom. Professor Sara Sinha will be talking on integration of indigenous knowledge in teacher education. Professor P.C. Agrawal will be talking on integration of indigenous knowledge in science and mathematics. Professor Y. Srikant, Principal RI Mysuru, will be talking on indigenous pedagogy at primary school level, and Professor Manoj Saxena from Himachal University will be talking on role of indigenous knowledge and its protection in modern times. So they will be focusing on that in their own areas, and since time is very short, about we have 1.5 hours now, so I'll be requesting each of the scholars, each of the presenter, keynote speaker, panelists, to confine their talk from between 8 to 10 minutes. If it is 8 to 9 minutes, it's okay. Then I'll be first requesting Professor Manoj Saxena. Professor Manoj Saxena is here. Professor Manoj Saxena.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm there.
Professor Manoj Saxena, as I said, will be talking on role of indigenous knowledge, its protection in modern times. Let me have a brief introduction of Professor Manoj Saxena. As you know, I will not be giving a very elaborate introduction because time is such. Professor Manoj Saxena is a student of commerce and education, really a multidisciplinary professor, now campus coordinator of Central University, one of the campus of Central University of Himachal Pradesh, Dharmasala. He has a wide experience in the field of education. He's academic council, member of academic council, dean, head, director, NAC coordinator, NAC expert, and also peer team member of NCT. He's also in UGC expert committee. He is a reviewer of very prominent journals. He has been also awarded by Rotary International Rotary Youth Leadership Award. He has 9 books to his credit, and 95 research papers, and many other achievements, Professor Saxena. So, with this brief introduction, I request Professor Manoj Saxena to start his presentation. Over to Professor Manoj Saxena.
Thank you, Professor Pradhan. The chairperson of this panel discussion, Professor Ashish Srivastava. The moderator, Professor Nityanand Pradhan ji. Professor S.C. Roy, and my dear fellow panelists and distinguished participants who joined us across the country. I'm thankful to Professor Rai for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. As you know that UNESCO defines the indigenous knowledge as local, and indigenous knowledge refers to the understanding, skills, philosophies developed by society with long histories of interaction with their natural surroundings. For rural and indigenous peoples, local knowledge informs decision making about fundamental aspects of day-to-day life. The knowledge is integral to a cultural complex that also encompasses language, system of classification, resource use practices, social interactions, ritual and spirituality. India's culture is one of the world's oldest culture, dating back 4,500 years. India must take a balanced and inclusive approach to have a global standard in the 21st century. In the post-COVID-19 era, the natural resources of our world are rapidly diminishing. Our indigenous knowledge, which holds the spirit of nature and help to regenerating our nature and contribute to sustainable development. Throughout the history, especially during colonial period, a sense of absolute superiority has always dominated indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge that Indians have inherited and long prevailing has been referred as superstition by Western science. The solitary tribal culture is closely linked to their way of life and environment. Because they are isolated, they are in disadvantaged group and have no power when it comes to their claim to indigenous knowledge. With a spiritual element, indigenous knowledge has been passed down to generation through traditional storytelling and imitation among particular clans. Many modern scientists have criticized indigenous people's emotional attachment with their culture. Most manufacturing procedures have been largely replaced by modern technologies, but the indigenous knowledge has grown in popularity over time as a result of its eco-friendly, time-proven technology, techniques, and underlying cultures. Our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi emphasized the importance of disseminating Ayurvedic knowledge and home remedies, which have been used in practically every Indian household. To enhance this ancient knowledge as per modern needs, Ayurveda and other traditional medicinal and environmental practices must be examined in the light of daily medicine system. Indigenous knowledge has been labeled primitive, backward, rural, unscientific, and other derogatory terms. But in the present times, many companies trying to invent strategies to describe a finding as an innovation without providing fair credit to persons or community who possess that knowledge for generation leads to intellectual dishonesty. As more information in this field of environmental and ethical debate has been revealed, many biopiracy instances have came into light, which shows the exploitation of Indian traditional knowledge. For the last 2 decades of the 20th century, various interest groups came together to support the indigenous people's right, their traditional knowledge, resources, and ways of life. Activists have defended the rights of indigenous people to manage their natural surroundings independently. Present biotechnologists believe that indigenous knowledge of nature would be the key for future medicine and pharmaceutical research. After independence, India's economic policy intended to optimize resource extraction for exports, large-scale conversions from food to cash crop farming, and increase industrialization. The implementation of these policies exploited the environment and caused different issues such as growing pollution problems, the depletion of soil water, and other natural resources. Due to this industrialization, small farmers and indigenous tribal people were affected the most by losing their lands, livelihoods, and fighting for survival. Indigenous knowledge can be found in every aspect of life, including the arts, food, science, health, and technology. Such knowledge could be useful for the concept of sustainable development. You know that India is the birthplace of Ayurveda and yoga. It has rapidly expanded over the world at this time. The importance of yoga and Ayurveda is recognized by people all around the world. Turmeric, that is haldi, camphor, that is kapoor, and other complex have traditionally been recorded to treat physical injuries. Even in agriculture, substances from some plants and animals, such as cow dung, are utilized to increase productivity and protect certain crops. The concept of rainwater harvesting is also not new in India. These are systems to retain rainwater for future use in several places of India, having low water rains, such as steps wells and tanks in Rajasthan, and are the part of their ancient culture. You see in Nagaland also, every house stores the rainwater into big tanks by using pipes from their roofs. The modern scientific approach and industrialization has adversely affected the indigenous culture and knowledge. A significant portion of the world's wide and cultivated biodiversity area is traditionally maintained by local communities, indigenous people. These areas are crucial for ecological capacities and maintain the human and non-human prosperity, as well as reducing carbon emissions. But with the human dependency on machinery and technology, indigenous people are facing unbalanced social and natural challenges. If we talk about some of the threats, these threats are several studies have documented the extinction or modification of indigenous religions among present generation. They are not much aware with the traditional practices or the culture. This is one of the major reasons for extinction of indigenous culture. Ecological change can affect the population. Overuse of resources, exploitation of native grounds belongs to indigenous people. The result of such change can cause the migration of local community. Intercultural communication from non-indigenous community can affect the indigenous knowledge transmission systems. It causes different changes in traditional institutions, livelihood practices, and beliefs. If we talk about intellectual property rights, the ancient knowledge system of India has a rich history as long as the human civilization. In our ancient culture, there was no formal concept of property or in present time, the indigenous follow the world policies and practices that will help them to maintain their traditions and knowledge systems. It gives them a core identity that is based on their past, present, and future. Our culture and traditional knowledge is essential for humans. Traditional knowledge is preserved, protected, and used through intellectual property rights systems. In recent years, IPR awareness of Indian knowledge has grown in worldwide famous on topics ranging from food and agriculture to the environment, health, human rights, and indigenous issues. The IPR in relation to indigenous knowledge can be divided into two main parts. That is positive protection, which gives indigenous community the right to take action or remedies against certain forms of misuse of indigenous knowledge. Under this protection, communities are able to promote their traditional and its usage and earn profit from its economic use. And another one is defensive protection, that is preventing others from obtaining illegal right for indigenous knowledge and subject matter. which belongs to a particular community or country. To gain this protection, it is necessary that the local authority or the community prove that knowledge is practiced in their area for a long time. The Traditional Knowledge Digital Library is a project of aimed at safeguarding Indian traditional medicinal knowledge and preventing its exploitation in international patent offices. It was created to overcome language and format barriers for converting and organizing the available contents of medical ancient books in an orderly and scientific manner. Near than 4 formulation practices have been transcribed into the TKDL database. Indigenous knowledge can be a good supporter for building relationship with the school and communities. The elders in tribal and local communities are more crucial and responsible for such public education system. To elevate and develop the status of indigenous knowledge, teach needs to be more attentive to integrate indigenous knowledge in education. Indigenous knowledge can generate new vision of education practices. The indigenous knowledge varies with the local community and people. In our country, diverse communities have different in doing some work. An example of this in same cotton are differently used in different region of country and prepare variety of textile and fabrics. Our country has a vast and multicultural history of education. Our future should be built on our glorious past. This knowledge can guide us for our future education.
Try to wind up.
Sure, sir. Within a minute or two, I am just winding up. Not only in India, but the whole world has the importance of their indigenous knowledge in education. Countries like Australia, US, etc. have also taken many initiatives to integrate their local knowledge into education, such as native languages, promoting native traditions and customs, etc. In Indian education system, it is critical to include the tribal history and indigenous knowledge. We must teach our generation to respect our ancestral knowledge and value of our tradition with the modern scientific approach. The indigenous knowledge has the ability to sustain with the nature without hampering it. It is one of the main reasons that it has survived from era to era, but the present consumerism approach is focusing only on the productivity and exploit the natural resources, which is a short-term growth or can be known as false development. I conclude with these words that solution for this is to develop the understanding and respect for our traditional knowledge and culture in our youth and encourage them to explore this wisdom with new possibilities. We should be proud with our tradition and indigenous knowledge, and I hope that we, the teacher educators, will include the traditional knowledge in our day-to-day teaching. And here I just share with you all that my university, that is Central University of Himachal Pradesh, we have included Indian knowledge system as a paper for our undergraduate and postgraduate studies.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so thank you all for being me patiently. I'm thankful to my friend Professor S.C. Roy for to this panel.
Thank you, Professor Saxena, for bringing into fore the role of indigenous knowledge in daily lives and also in different sectors, development sectors, with examples from different parts of India, and also discussing about intellectual property right issues, patenting of indigenous knowledge, which is the claim of indigenous people. So now our next with this, I thank you, and lastly, Professor Ashish Srivastava, the chairperson, will summarize the whole thing. Now the next speaker is Professor Sara. She is also from our NCERT fraternity, now heading the Department of Teacher Education at NIE-NCERT. She has a vast experience in teaching, from school teaching to college teaching to in Regional Institute of Education, Ajmer. She has also some administrative experience, like she was the Deputy Secretary Academic at NCT New Delhi, and also regulatory functions as the Regional Director, Western Regional Council, Bhopal, and also Regional Director, Eastern Regional Council, Bhubaneswar. She has headed different departments of the NIE, like RMSSL. She was heading RMSA Project Cell, NCERT, and currently she's heading. Currently, she is heading Department of Teacher Education. She is a member of various committees on teacher education and on standard setting of schools, particularly of by Central Board of Secondary Education. Her area of interest includes teacher education, science education, teacher leadership and innovation, e-learning, science and communication, and popularization. So, needless to say that she is a member of different committees in different universities, and also she has many research works and research publications to her credits. Now, without wasting time, I request Professor Sara Sinha. She will be talking on integration of indigenous knowledge in teacher education, and I also request her to speak for 8 to 10 minutes. Thank you. Over to Professor Sara Sinha.
Namaskar and a very good morning to all. Respected Chairperson, Professor Ashish Srivastav, the moderator of the session, Professor Nityavrand Pradhan, my fellow colleagues, I see Professor Shrikant, I see Professor Agrawal, Professor Pushpanandam also, I see Professor Arvind Jha also as the members, and Professor Manoj Saxena, the previous speaker. I'm sorry if I've left some name. A very good morning again, and thank you for providing me this opportunity. Although this is something which is very much talked about after the NEP 2020, about integrating and incorporating indigenous knowledge system in the school education, teacher education. There's a lot of talk about incorporating indigenous practices in the school curriculum also. And we have a focus group also specially dedicated for that. So it gives me immense pleasure to be speaking on that, a topic of my choice. And as far as indigenous knowledge is concerned, we often mistake indigenous knowledge with the traditional knowledge. Normally we use it as synonymous. Yesterday, I had the honor of chairing a session in this seminar, and there I listened to various practices, indigenous practices of Northeast, Kerala, and many other states. So that gave me a peekaboo of view of what is happening all over the country, and so many practices which we are not knowing about. And which the question arises, first question arises that why in the age of information explosion, there is so much of knowledge all around, there's so much of information all around. And with this pandemic, we access technology more often. The students have better access to technology. We have so much of information on a topic. It is very difficult to sift the information and find the relevant information. Now, again, with the relevant existing information, why do we need indigenous knowledge and indigenous practices? And why do we need to integrate them? This is a big, big question which stands before us. Yesterday, when I was listening to various practices, I came to know that there is an extensive wealth of knowledge. As the previous speaker, Professor Saxena, also mentioned that so much of knowledge is in every field, be it science, be it Ayurveda, be it home science. And while giving an introductory remark, Professor Pradhan also mentioned that there is so much of, there's in the culture, everywhere there is so much of indigenous knowledge. But in sports And in various areas, we have tribal knowledge, we have traditional ways of learning. In medicine, it could be agriculture, it could be engineering, it could be linguistics, and it could be tribal, ethno-medical practices, then philosophy, yoga, architecture, polity, so many areas, crop rotation, natural farming, so many areas are there. But how do we integrate? The policy emphasizes on integrating. How a teacher is going to integrate this knowledge? This is a big question. That is, it could be whether the teacher is using, what are the approaches? Instead of, we already have so many pedagogical approaches which the teachers are exposed to. And as in Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, I happen to meet so many in-service teachers of all over the country. They have wealth of information, but the problem always which comes to them, and which we also experience, that apart from what they are teaching in the classroom, which is required to be completed in the classroom, the syllabi which is given to them, apart from them, integrating something in the syllabus becomes a big challenge. So if we are talking about integrating indigenous knowledge in various subjects, what are the areas which are to be identified and how they are to be done? I take three approaches. That is, I feel that there could be three approaches which could be incorporating the indigenous knowledge. That is incorporating approach. And when you incorporate this approach, it could be time tested, it could be scientific. Not all indigenous practices can be applied in all the contexts. And they should stand, the one big question is that they should stand the test of time, and they should be scientifically proven, because there are many practices which do not have any scientific base, but still they are useful. Many practices which are tested in then seen from the lens of science, they are questionable. So one has to see the teacher, one has to be really critical, one has to see whether we have to incorporate it as a whole, or the best one which fits in category, if the fits into your syllabus, fits into your context, that's the greatest approach. Sifting, choosing, and using syllabus. That would be a simplest approach. And the third one would be an integration approach. That is, you are teaching whatever you have to teach, because there is a very, very strong factor in our country that the teachers stick to the books, stick to the syllabi. They have to. That is required. Whatever we may say, whatever important evidence we give of extra knowledge, connecting to the nature, connecting to the classroom, the first is finishing of the syllabus. So it has to be seen whether the approach has to be integrating approach, setting approach, or incorporating approach. And particularly, one more thing which I would like to press on, the buzzer, the time is running. It could be, there could be non-appropriated indigenous knowledge also. That could be integrated in the curriculum, syllabus, pedagogy. We need to devise. Now the policy says we are into it, we are doing, we need to devise ways, and ways which have to be innovative, fit into the time budgeting. And knowledge, I feel for teacher, it becomes very important for the teacher to see the areas. It could be values, it could be in the field of language, it could be in the form of traditional food, it could be in the form of spiritual actions, and knowledge of the environment, song, dance, poetry, play, construction activities, aesthetics, and so on and so forth. So I would say that it needs to be before integrating. Of course, we would be integrating. There would be some part. There will be questions. There will be rationing when for it doing this and explaining that. The teacher.
Madam, your attention, please, madam. Please show your video. Yes, yes. Oh, sorry. No video. Only audio, because there is some problem here. Can you please switch off your video? Madam Sara Sinha?
My video will.
No, actually, madam, your voice is breaking. Your voice is breaking. Therefore, they are asking to stop pause your video.
Please switch off your video.
Okay. Is it okay now? More one last minute I'll take.
Yes.
We have been, it's already 7 minutes as my timer says. So I would say that we are talking of indigenous knowledge that is gained and add on to what has been existing. Since the policy demands, we need to see a very practical way of what from the vast pool of indigenous knowledge which the country possesses has to be picked and used for the improving the quality of education. And definitely the teacher have to be oriented beforehand in order to implement into the classroom. I again with the Sanskrit shloka and give me a second. This Vittam Vidya Bhavati Panchami Etani Manya Sthani Yo Yaduturam. That means money, family, age, big and knowledge. These are 5 places of honor. But family over wealth, age over family, good deeds over age, and knowledge over everything is most honorable. And it is the teacher who is the parent, who is the key to disseminate this. Thank you very much and Jai Hind.
Madam, for bringing out or discussing about the complex nature of integrating indigenous knowledge in teacher education, integrated, and because it talks of integrating indigenous knowledge in curriculum, syllabus, and pedagogy, and also you have told about examining the scientific status of indigenous knowledge before integrating and orientation of teachers. Thank you very much. On behalf of NERIE, I extend a very I extend thanks to you. The next speaker is Professor P.C. Agarwal, Prakash Chandra Agarwal. He is currently Principal, Regional Institute of Education, Bhubaneswar, that represents the eastern region of the country. Professor Agarwal is a student of physics and education, and you'll be happy to know that after being principal, he has started pursuing PhD in education also. He did his MA when he was a principal RI Bhubaneswar, and now pursuing PhD in education. He's a very eminent scholar. He has a bright career as a student. He has scored National Rural Talent Scholarship for school education, and he has been also awarded by Rajasthan Board of Secondary Education Ajmer that he has got scholarship for college education. He has also he is also CSIR Junior and Senior Research Fellowship, and he has also received the National Best Teacher Educator Award of 2019 by NCTE. He has, prior to becoming the principal of RI Bhubaneswar, he has also worked as head and dean in at RI Ajmer, and he's also Dean Faculty of Pedagogical Sciences, Utkal University, and he was also at Ajmer. He's a chairperson of different committees like Subject Research Committee, Advisory Committee, Rajasthan Physics Education Association, and so on. He has worked in different colleges also in the state of Rajasthan. He has 29 years of research experience, and he has 9 books to his credit. So these are here he is also guiding research scholars at PhD level. So this is only some of his credits, academic credits and administrative credits. With this brief introduction, I request Professor P. Agrawal to talk about integration of indigenous knowledge in science and mathematics. Over to Professor P. Agrawal.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Esteemed Chairperson, Professor Ashish Srivastava, Professor Nityanand Pradhan, our lovely colleague, moderator of this session, my colleagues, co-panelists, Professor Sharat Sinha, Head DT, NCERT, Professor Srikant, Professor Manoj Saxena, Pusnathan, and all those who are present here, and dear participants. As we all know, I will not take much time in defining what is indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge. We use these terms interchangeably. I would like to come directly to the point that we have so many things in science that we can incorporate in our present knowledge, in present lab skills still even. And we have taken a project in RI Bhubaneswar where we are developing books like NCERT textbooks with mapping of those concepts that we could have done those things using ancient pedagogy. So that we are doing means we are mapping the NCERT books with old literature available in mathematics. So I'll just speak out something if time will permit, that what we have done in maths. Otherwise, I'll be confining to science only. So we all know now it is an era of nanotechnology, and we all know that our goldsmiths, they used to know nanotechnology centuries before. We all know that even in 1 gram gold, there can be a layer and ornaments are used. So why? Because what is nanotechnology actually? Because I should tell here, in nanotechnology we take nano parameter, and nano means 10 raised to power minus 9. So few atoms, it is a cluster of few atoms, 4 to 5 atoms or 5 to 6 atoms. If we make a gold leaf so thin, then height wise we have only 5 to 6 atoms. And this was used in Rutherford's model, where he bombarded alpha beam on gold foil to see the structure of atom. Even when we talk about atom, then the name of our predecessor Kanath comes. He defined that the tiniest indestructible part of any substance is atom, and he even told that 2 or more atoms can combine together, dvayanuk or trianuk, diatomic molecule or triatomic molecule, which later, very later, it was defined by Dalton. So whenever we teach Dalton, definitely we can give a credit to Kanath, and we can integrate that how indigenous knowledge is leading us to scientific advancements. And this Rutherford model takes forward us from atom. Actually, I am from physics, so I am speaking much physics, but I am trying to come down to very basics. Similarly, when about silver, we used to have utensils, not every man, but at least the king rulers, that they would have used silver pots for water. Why? Because this surface tension, when we talk about surface tension, that is, this is in school education, that there is an angle of contact. Meniscus is there, either liquid makes concave meniscus or convex meniscus when it is filled in some pot, some utensil. But for silver and water, the angle of contact is 0. So it is perfectly level. There is not double meniscus, and that's why we're using silver pots, silver utensils, because that will reduce the reduction and oxidation. As Professor Manoj Saxena ji also told that in Rajasthan, people, they used ponds, alras for management of water. I have been that area for 2 years and I have seen them physically, and they are dependent only on water. There are no other means. In some pockets of Rajasthan, in desert, Thar desert, they knew that how evaporation and vaporization can be reduced, because if evaporation is there, then we cannot preserve water for whole of the year. So, and that water should not be contaminated also, because they will be using it for 1 year. So they were well aware about what are the pollutants which can pollute or contaminate the water, and how vaporization and evaporation can be checked. So how they will store water with a small opening. So that we can connect even today in our water harvesting or water management system, water bodies. We could see that in ancient times, people were using in a vertical plane buckets connected together so that the water comes out from the well of bullocks or with the help of some other mechanism. The same thing we can see in turbines when electricity is produced. There either we will have windmill or we will have some waterfall just to rotate those buckets, and at axle either we can have magnet or coil. So we need either magnet, both magnet and coil, and we have to move them. That turbine is used for that. So that mechanism, that technology, we were well aware even before centuries. These things are of pride, and when we connect these things with our current knowledge, then actual knowledge development takes place, because our cultural roots are very important for our future development. When we go in castles, see palaces, then we find the use of mirrors, how they were using mirrors, multiple reflection, beautiful reflection, bits of mirrors. I think you would have visited Sheesh Mahal. There are certain palaces. So they were well aware that how these mirrors should be fit so that they will give a better picture, even in aesthetic sense also. When I talk about musical instruments, we were well aware of percussive, membrane, water column, water air column, all type of musical instruments, even jal taran. And that gives an idea that how sonic waves are produced, how ultrasonic waves can be connected with sonic waves, and all these things. So they were well aware about waves. Jal tarang is one of the example. Iktara, indigenous instruments, and they can give us lot of scientific skills, lot of scientific understanding. And those things we should integrate in our textbooks wherever appropriate. We all know about Ram Setu near Rameshwaram, Sri Lanka. Stones are floating there. So we had idea of density that time also. Only those materials can float on water which have less density than water. So porosity is in those stones. There are pores, there are tubical pores, and those pores make them less denser. So since these things are available, basaltic rocks are available with us. With these basaltic rocks, we can explain that how density is reduced in stones as compared to water, while other stones, they will sink down when they are put in water. So these are some ideas, and these are only some examples. We can have a lot of more examples for this. Now I'll try to show you something what we have done in mathematics. So for that, I would like to share my PPT. Please wait for a minute, and that time. We all know now that this is digital era. Digital technology is very important. And in that digital technology, binary number system is very, very important. Binary number system means, if I talk in terms of numerals, then zeros, ones are important. And when I talk in terms of logics, then true or false. In terms of some material video, audio, video. So, okay, so Indians had sufficient knowledge of binary algebra, Boolean algebra at that time. Pingala had given concept of binary numbers much before, and that binary number now we are using in digital electronics, in any digital platform, even in computer science. When we talk about Fibonacci series, Fibonacci series, actually we don't teach these things in our classes, but this was first given by Viranka Gopala and M. Chandra, and Italian mathematicians could introduce it at a very later stage. I think I'm audible. I think I'm audible, sir.
Yes, perfectly audible, sir.
Yes.
Perfectly audible.
Audible.
Yeah. Similarly, when we estimate diameter of Earth, or circumference of Earth, or distance of Sun from Earth, or Moon from Earth, then even in 7th century BC, before Christ, Brahmagupta proposed this, and he estimated that circumference of Earth is 36,000 kilometers, which is very close to actual recent figure even. So we had enough idea that how these circumferences can be estimated, can be calculated. Those things we can bring in our textbooks. Similarly,
Professor Agrawal, please summarize in a minute or two.
Sir, 2 minutes I'll take. Then I'll just go to mathematics. Some examples. There are total 16 sutras, and we can do mathematics, algebra, arithmetic, trigonometry using these sutras. These are certain examples where I have shown here that what we are doing now in conventional method and what we were doing in ancient method. You can find here, you can see here that if I multiply 65 by 65, this is just an example. Then conventional method, it is shown in left hand side, in Vedic method or in ancient method. Very easily you can get the result. Different numbers where unit place is not 5. There are again certain methods. These methods, I'm not recommending that we should go to ancient methods all the time, but actually everyone, student, teacher, educator, they should know different methods. There should not be a unique method, or there is not a unique method to solve problems. Now it is up to the teacher, educator, or even a student that which method he finds suitable, which gives logical reasoning in his mind, rational thinking is created. So these are certain examples because time is limited, but we can do the same type of problem, arithmetical problem, by many ways, and doing many ways actually the mathematization of thinking takes place. Our objective is to teach mathematics, is to mathematize the thinking, and when we go just in a mechanical format, the mathematization doesn't take place, and therefore there should be different methods taught, different ways with different logics, and that will enrich mathematization of the teacher educator. So these are certain examples. Since time is limited, I'm sorry for that I couldn't see you all slides or everything, but these are certain examples where we can see that we can connect our past with present and can move to the future. Thank you very much for giving me this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Agrawal, for discussing about integration of indigenous knowledge in science with illustrations from history, Vedic mathematics, with their scientific reasons and rationale. In fact, it seems you have a treasure of illustrations, how to integrate indigenous knowledge in science and mathematics. It's quite experiential and interesting also. But because of shortage of time, we have to remind you. Thank you very much on behalf of NERIE.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker is Professor K. Puspanandam. He was also a keynote speaker. He was keynote speaker yesterday, and he gave a very exhaustive presentation on the topic. Professor Puspanandam is currently heading Department of Educational Administration in one of the reputed university, particularly in the context of education. That is Center of Advanced Study in Education, Baroda. Everybody must be knowing. Professor Puspanandam has been Dean, Senate member, academic board member, and he has immense international exposure. He was a visiting scholar of in Sweden, in some university of Sweden, and also he has been he was a visiting professor in some university at Denmark and Thailand, and also as guest professor in an university in Afghanistan. So, needless to say that he has, to his credit, many research papers published in journals of national and international repute, and guiding so many PhD scholars. I know him since last many years, Professor Puspanandam, since his young days. He has international exposure to different, and he has stayed in perhaps Denmark for long years. With this brief introduction, I request Professor Puspanandam to talk about integration of indigenous knowledge and the use of technologies. So now over to Professor K. Puspanandam.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professor Nityanand Pradhan, for a kind introduction. And Dr. Ashish Srivastava on the chair, and my co-panelists. We have been discussing about the indigenous knowledge, local wisdom, and the traditional knowledge, and its rich heritage, and how that can be used and integrated into educational programs. So before I begin, let me bring to the floor certain very important statements which were made by the Western historians about their experiences with the India as a nation. You know, very famous American historian, Will Durant, somewhere in 19th century. And he, in his book, clearly mentions that it is true that even across the Himalayan barrier, India has sent to the West such gifts as a grammar and logic, philosophy and fables, hypnotism and chess, and above all, numerals and the decimal system. And the very famous Albert Einstein, he states very clearly, he says that we owe a lot to Indians who taught us how to count, without which no worthwhile scientific discovery have been possible. And it was mentioned by none other than the Albert Einstein. So friends, today we are widely talking about Swabhiman and Atmanirbhar Bharat, which talks about we need to realize, appreciate our indigenous knowledge, our local wisdom, our practices, which are so strong in our culture. And that has to be fine-tuned and bring back to the forefront, not to feel proud alone, but to make human life a quality life. I think this is what is the purpose of any knowledge that we generate. You know, when you talk about the knowledge creation is a shared product. It cannot be through an individual effort alone. And it is having a very typical characteristic of cumulative nature. And the knowledge develops several perspectives. And if you see the scientific perspective, what we call the modern scientific knowledge today, we have the basis of local wisdom, which really contributed to this modern scientific knowledge. You know, I was reading somewhere, and it clearly says, even the aspirin, you know, the tablet, which was actually derived from a medicinal plant. And that's how today you talk the modern knowledge as pharmacology is something for the medicinal plants, their properties, and how they can really contribute to human survival and the progress. And if you see the Indian context, we feel so proud that we have the Vedic knowledge, whether we talk about the Vedas. We also have a rich text of our own, the economist Chanakya. We have Yoga Shastra. We have Natya Shastra. We have even Jyotisha Shastra. Friends, when the science was not existing, when the science was not accessible, these were the traditional practices that people used to apply in their life and to monitor and control their life practices. And when the science came, the rationality, the logic, and the empirical evidences, and we must understand that these things have grown from what we had as a traditional knowledge, what we had as a local wisdom. And this has to be understood. And the local wisdom and the traditional knowledge is a global slogan today. Even the most the prominent universities in the world, MIT, when they were coining this interdisciplinary nature of teaching, learning in higher education, even in the school education, when the initial word was the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And then the dean of MIT, who has a rich knowledge and the belief about the indigenous knowledge, he stressed the importance of arts into it. So today the STEM has become a stream where the art component talks about the cultural aspects. The art component about the indigenous human life and how it was actually run over the years. So what is important today is the conservation of cultural diversity. Is something that educational institutions need to do in the time of globalization and cultural homogenization. And the second important thing that we need to do is the retention of technical traditional knowledge in all spheres. When you talk about the agriculture, animal husbandry, the naturopathy, the healthcare. So how these practices were prevailing of that time and how they can really contribute to the modern science and technology. So conservation of cultural diversity and the retention of traditional knowledge which are the two main purposes for any education system. So friends, let me share my experience with the young children of 21st century. We feel proud to say that this 21st century is full of opportunities. We have leaped through the technology, artificial intelligence, virtual knowledge, the augmented realities, virtual realities we have been talking about. But please encounter with these small children to know their knowledge about the indigenous spices, which have the medicinal knowledge. Whether you talk in terms of gus, when you talk in terms of jeera, you talk in terms of cloves, you talk in terms of methi, turmeric, the neem, giloy, aloe vera. These are all the natural products which our ancestors used for their livelihood, used for their good health, and they have protected and passed it on to us. But unfortunately, our young generations are not aware. Probably they have not seen these Indian spices. They cannot name them. And who is at fault? Who has to be blamed? It is the education system. In the pursuit of competitions, in the pursuit of the modern scientific knowledge and the devices, we have absolutely forgotten our indigenous treasure. And that has to be brought into the forefront. Therefore, what has to be done? Friends, I have three important things that every educational institution need to position indigenous knowledge into a disciplinary perspective or a practice within the institutions. As Professor Agrawal was rightly pointing out, how you can map the indigenous knowledge with the modern scientific knowledge and give exposure to children to experience that. So the first thing what we need to do, we need to have a dedicated effort to identify and capture the local knowledge. The knowledge and the practices of ancient people in terms of agriculture, animal husbandry, and many things that they do, and water harvesting. And the second important thing is, with use of modern technologies, we need to have the scientific explanations or validations of this knowledge. Why? Because we wanted to disseminate this to the larger communities for their well-being, for their utility. Therefore, with our modern scientific the knowledge and the experimentations, and also the kind of the connections that we have across the globe, we really need to scientifically validate the knowledge and put into a kind of a documentation, and then the dissemination. So technology plays a very, very, very important role in this context. We are very lucky to have, we can reach to the world. Friends, let me tell you, the yoga has got a status of International Yoga Day. But the yoga has been existing with us for ages. It is the political will, number one. It is the academicians' continuous pursuits. We could make yoga useful to the world. It's not only a proud movement, but it is the great contribution for health and well-being of the whole universe. I think we can contribute to many of these things into our education system and let our people know the indigenous perspectives, the Indian knowledge systems. I call Indian knowledge systems. Whether you talk about the Vedic knowledge, whether you talk about all kinds of the treasures that we have, and they can be applied to human life and well-being. And with this, I stop and I welcome your questions in our discussion. Thank you, Professor Pradhan.
Thank you, Dr. Pushpanandan, for your Again, very nice deliberations, and starting from the appreciation of indigenous knowledge of India by Einstein, and you have talked about the contribution of scientists, economists, artists, medicine persons, astronomers, yogis of ancient India, and you have also highlighted the identification and documentation of local knowledge and examining their scientific base to fit them to 21st century. Thank you, Professor Puspanandam, on behalf of the organizers of the conference and my institute. With this, now I'll be inviting Professor Y. Srikant, who is a student of geography and education as well, and he is now currently principal Regional Institute of Education, Mysuru, that represents western region of the country. Before becoming the principal of Regional Institute of Education, Mysuru, Professor Srikant was heading the Department of Educational Measurement and Evaluation. Then he was also heading the Educational Survey Division. He was also in charge of National Talent Search at NIE New Delhi, and as faculty of Curriculum Group, Department of Secondary Education, and also for some time he has served in Nepal as associate professor, and professor now it is called NIPA, National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration. The area he has, to his credit, he has many research papers and research works, and as I find, his interest is on education of a disadvantaged group and current research and current policies, and also his area of interest are student assessment, education under public and private sector, and educational quality and accountability. With this brief introduction, I request, I invite Professor Srikant to talk on indigenous pedagogy at primary school level. Over to Professor Srikant.
Thank you, Professor Pradhanji, for the introduction, and respected Professor Ashishji, the chairperson of this session, my co-panelists from different parts of the country, Professor S.C. Rai and Professor Bhatt Thakur and other colleagues from NERIE Shillong. I'm privileged to be here along with many other co-panelists who have already extensively spoken about various aspects related to indigenous knowledge systems. In fact, as it is known all over the world, IKS, indigenous knowledge systems, have a very important role to play, especially in the lives of the children early in their educational career. In fact, we all understand that there is a lot, especially in the Indian context, because we have rich national heritage and past. What stops us in accepting these aspects as part of our curriculum? I would start with some hindrances, obstacles that we have, and then go on to one example through which I would explain how it has been incorporated in one of the indigenous systems that we have at the local level. In fact, when we talk about the indigenous knowledge, it always competes with the international knowledge systems, and normally it is held in high esteem. The other knowledge is held in high esteem in comparison to the local knowledge. It is also considered as unofficial knowledge. It is not considered as official knowledge because there is no proper documentation to many of the things that we talk about. And also, in accepting indigenous knowledge, there are different opinions and viewpoints. It is considered as inferior because it is considered as folk knowledge in comparison to the Western knowledge, the subjects of which we study in a very segmented fashion, and which is also an obstacle. And also that, there is a standardization process which happens in the Western knowledge, which is not possible in accepting the indigenous knowledge at local level. Then, when it comes to knowledge integration, we all know that those subjects are studied separately. When it comes to the reality, they are integrated, and also students have to be shown practical examples in order to understand the reality better. So that way, any knowledge system will have to have local adaptations. To some extent, the national identity and also the international dynamics also play a critical role in validating what is considered as the local knowledge and also indigenous knowledge. So that also is something very important. And also people are of the belief that indigenous knowledge is confined to one particular community. So whether it will be useful if one goes beyond that community. So this is something, again, is considered as something very serious. Then again, indigenous knowledge systems are validated through Western standards, which is again a hindrance in the sense if there is no documentation, if there is no reference, then it is not considered as an authentic source. In fact, the rich oral histories that we have do not have any documentation. Like Professor Agarwal and others have spoken about how ancient Indian knowledge is so vibrant, especially in the usage of several food grains and things like that. Say, for example, turmeric. In fact, research is being done extensively in order to see, what are the scientific benefits of turmeric. Although, in every Indian home all across the country, we use turmeric irrespective of the regional variations. So there are so many things. So let me also define very briefly about what consists of indigenous knowledge system in order to understand it better, although it must have been defined before. It is a total knowledge and practices, whether explicit or implicit, used in the management of socio-economic, ecological, and spiritual facet of life, stored in the collective memory and communicated orally among the members of the community and to the future generations through songs, stories, myths, etc. So, it certainly will not have proper documentation, which I think the coming generations will have to do in order to give due place to these aspects. Now I take the example of Jenu Kuruba, a community which is living in the Mysore district. In fact, as part of our study, a block level study, I had interacted with some of these community members. They speak Kannada, but their dialect is different in the sense, and also the language, the context, the culture, everything is different. In fact, sometimes they themselves do not consider as integral part of the culture of Karnataka, but many things get mixed up. So in a way, if you deeply understand, you can learn from them that they are no different. But certainly, this is a cultural group which is preserving its culture. There is an NGO which is helping them for the last more than 40 years. In fact, Jenu means honey. Kuruba means a community, a scheduled tribe community. In the sense, they are basically honey tappers. And what I came across was a very interesting book, which can be used right from primary level to even in case of adult education also, this will be very useful. So based on my understanding of interacting with these people and also, this particular book, I'm going to speak for a few minutes. In this book, they have perfectly integrated various dimensions. It starts with community identity. In fact, the Jenu, the honey culture that they have, the beehives, it is shown as watermark in this book in every page. So which gives them that their identity is important. So it starts with their identity. It does not just start with alphabets like A, B, C, D. I mean, I'm just giving the example, but it starts with Kuraba, the community name. In the sense they start with Ka, so how it is pronounced, and then relating that with the community. So this is something very crucial. In fact, when they associate the language with their own culture context, so it will be very useful for them. So the images are presented and they are associated with the life, day-to-day life of these people. In the sense, every aspect that you see in this small book, so there is a relationship, there is a gradual progression from, the local culture to the national culture. They talk about local panchayats and how their people get elected, and right from there they proceed to the elections up to the parliament, etc., and create awareness about the democratic relationship. And there is no negative depiction of their culture at any point of time in this entire book. So it shows them very positively, and even the life that they represent through pictures, it is very beautifully presented in every page. In the sense, even in teaching numbers, they associate with the images that the children see in their daily life. So I think it is possible. It is a mechanism through which they introduce learning to the children in their local context, and gradually they migrate to the, Kannada language and Kannada culture, etc. So I think this is a better way of integration, so that you create happiness among the children when they learn about themselves and when they do not undermine their own value system, ecological system, etc. So I think it is possible. Only we need to make effort, and efforts like this, through seminars, etc. We can, bring in this kind of aspects into the textbooks, and also as part of our culture, we can retain these aspects. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Srikant, for your focus on local adaptation of indigenous knowledge before using or before integrating in teaching learning process. Contextualization is a very important issue. Because indigenous knowledge is normally generated in a particular environment that speaks about the relationship, human relationship, non-human relationship, and the relationship between man and nature. So, when we are going to use particular indigenous knowledge in some other community or some other society, it must be contextualized. He has narrated it with his experience from block level study, that is Hunsur block of under that is RI Mysore, on behalf of the organizers of the seminar and also the NERIE fraternity. I thank you very much for your nice presentation. Now we will listen to Professor Arvind Kumar, who was also a speaker in the previous session, but due to some technical difficulty, he could not complete. And as I find, he will be talking on the topic indigenous knowledge in Indian thought system and its relevance for a contemporary classroom. Of course, it will be an extension of his talk in the previous session. Let me give a brief introduction of Professor Arvind Kumar Jha. He is a dynamic professor, having all his degrees from the University of Delhi, like bachelor's, master degree, MPhil, and PhD. He has never mentioned, I think, his expertise on mathematics, as I know, because I have long association with Professor Arvind Kumar Jha since our young days. He has been head, dean, and the director in different universities. He has worked in different universities like BB Ambedkar University, Lucknow Central University, Himachal Pradesh Dharamshala, Himachal Pradesh University, Mahatma Gandhi International University, Wardha, and presently he's in IGNO. Very recently, perhaps he joined in IGNO, and he has received two important awards like Fulbright Nehru International Education Administration Fellowship Award in 2016-17 and Inspired Teacher Award by President of India in 2015 at New Delhi. He has edited books and mostly there is two dimensions of his academic career, philosophy and mathematics. And I have heard from him about constructivism. When constructivism didn't come in the national as a national curriculum framework. He has published, in fact, many papers in journals of national and international repute. He has also good number of foreign exposures. He has visited many universities of states and also UK, Australia, and Singapore. So this is in brief about that long academic career. I'm not going to tell all of them because of time shortage. With this, I invite Professor Arvind Kumar Jha to speak on the topic of his interest, that is indigenous knowledge in Indian thought system and its relevance for contemporary classroom as an extension of his previous talk. Over to Professor Jha. Professor Jha, are you listening to me? Same problem, I think.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Professor Pradhan. We are good friends since more than 2 decades. We have shared our understanding, our perspective on education in different capacities, perhaps in many conferences which were organized by IIT. We are actively engaged, involved, and participated in that conference. Good to see you, Professor Pradhan, once again. Good to see my many friends. First of all, thanks to the chair, Professor Ashish ji, just younger brother. Good to see Manoj ji. After a long time, I heard him, and he spoke very meaningfully. Good to see my old colleague, Professor Sharad. After a long time, Pushpandam was also there. and many more. Dr. Shrikant spoke from the indigenous perspective I really liked. But I'll start with what Professor Agarwal has said. Particularly when he was presenting from the mathematics point of view, I wished he should have more time to speak on that concept and then move on. As Dr. Pradhan said, my first degree is in mathematics, the second in education, and later on I developed my interest in philosophy in general and epistemology in particular. Friends, I'll start with one quote by 1948-49, as mentioned by Radhakrishnan report. Radhakrishnan says that we should be proud of our ancestral knowledge. We should be proud of our past, but we should not always remain in the fatal attraction to the past knowledge. What is happening in the present, that is more important. And how do you incorporate those ideas, or how do you integrate those ideas into the present education system? And that's a major challenge. Unfortunately, as I said in the morning, when you will try to incorporate something into the existing schema of education per se, there will be a clash of not only at the ideological level, but at the paradigm level also. As I said in the morning, that even the very concept of knowledge, as it has been conceptualized, actualized, and it has been practiced and still practiced in the Western world, when I quote Norsetina's work, Epistemic Culture, and as it is done in a system or in a particular thought system, you will find the two contrast and contrasting, paradigms. For example, what is knowledge per se? So what is your knowledge in the Western discourse or in the paradigm of objective reality? And what is your knowledge in a cultural context? They will give you completely two contrasting worldview. So, I love to, quote things from my own text, from my own tradition. But I'll not say, okay, these things, whatever the things are there in the world, all these things were there earlier in the world. Yes, partially that's correct. My question is why it is not there in our educational discourses today. 75 years gone. You can say that now, you don't have the opportunity, you don't have the mechanism, you don't have the resources, you don't have the political will, or you don't have the knowledge and understanding of those knowledges, which various earlier speakers have mentioned right now so aptly, so judiciously. But the question is why it is not there in our educational discourses, either at the theoretical level or at practical level, or in the form of praxis. That's the one challenge. Secondly, why do you say that we will accommodate it and assimilate it or incorporate it? And if you become slightly generous, you'll say, we'll integrate it. No, I'm not in that favor. I'm not in that favor. There's a need to have a completely different scheme of our educational curriculum structure at the structure level, at the procedural level, at the implementation level, and at the assessment level as such. Well, so what is there in the Indian thought system? Let me start with that. Recently, I come across one study, and this has been done, it's an intercultural study done by a group of academicians, social thinkers, and educationists, of course, funded and internationally funded. And very clearly it says, the way science and mathematics both are taught and practiced in the world, they fail to develop the logicality, the logical argument ability, the reasoning dimension of the human mind. And here comes the role of, as Professor Agrawal said, mathematization of the human mind. Again, this is a contested terminology. Why? Because the mathematization of human mind in the context of India and in the context of Western world, both cannot be equated. Why? I'll come to that. Number one. Number two. Now, if that's not the case, because one of the major goals to teach mathematics, to learn mathematics, is to develop the logical ability. My youngest brother, who is the vice president in JP Morgan in US, and he has done his graduation and master in computer science. I asked him that after 5 years of learning computer science, particularly at the language level, what do you think? What is the fundamental necessary things that are required on the part of human being to come out the sound, logically founded machine language or the computer language in which things can be organized, presented, and practiced so systematically, which is a completely error-free. And his simple answer was, Bhaiya, I think this is logic, nothing else. Now come to the Indian thought system. Whether you talk any school of thought, the ultimate purpose was to have your own logic so that you can develop your own rationality in a relational setup and come to know how to live your own life, having all the components of human dignities. For example, as I said in the morning, like Nyaya epistemology, where there is no separation between logic, epistemology, rationality, and psychology to sustain my life. So, mathematical logic, as figure in Indian thought system, through various mode, and particularly in Nyaya system, it has to be brought into our curriculum, but not to incorporate, but to completely transform the curriculum. The curriculum, I find very problematic the way particularly teacher education curriculum has been conceptualized and which is being used at different level throughout India. Secondly, when you will find that the objective rationality, this is what the science has propagated. But in Indian context, it's not the objective rationality that is emphasized. Along with objective rationality, the more important component that is emphasized is the relational rationality, and which figures in almost all thought systems in India, whether you talk the Buddhism, the Jainism, or any traditional school of thought, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, or Vedanta. So kind of work that is required in the science. I'm happy that Professor Agrawal has mentioned the name of Kanad, propounder of the Vaisheshik philosophy. And why it is a Vaisheshik? Because it is a unique, it was spatial knowledge related to the molecule, right? But why Indian authors, Indian physicists, Indian scientific thinkers have failed to produce a kind of work Professor Capra produced, who is a professor of physics, who taught University of Austria, Vienna. And I would like to quote the name of the book, The Tao of Physics, where so vividly, so lucidly, with well-logical argument, has talked about that what kind of similarity is there between the cosmic dance of this cosmos and the dance of the Shiva. Similarly, as far as the mathematical understanding is concerned, why not some pioneer works we have done on the basis of Nyaya epistemology and Nyaya logic, including the field of mathematics? Like, that's my failure. I know one of my friends is teaching University of Austria, Vienna, and he teaches mathematical theorems on the basis of Nyaya philosophy and epistemology. I know only one professor from the background of Nyaya philosophy, Professor Pahi in Rajasthan University. I remember in Calcutta, conference, he gave me 65 pages document. He said that I was trying to develop mathematical theorem on the basis of my system of logic, but I failed to do so. So since you belong to the mathematical background, can you do so? But since last 10 years, I haven't done that. I haven't produced anything that. Similarly, I haven't produced anything related to binary operation. Similarly, I haven't produced anything related to zero. Why I said that the very concept of knowledge of a particular concept, you may call this concept as a mathematical concept, right? And the concept of zero varies from culture to culture, from context to context. I would like to present you in 2 minutes. I was presenting a paper in the University of Riverside, California. And the very moment I said that I come from the land which has given the concept of zero to the world, and there was one scholar from Arabian country who objected to my statement. And then I simply asked me, now we are friends, because he also used to teach mathematics pedagogy, that you tell me what is your understanding of zero in your cultural context. And I'll share my understanding of concept of zero in my cultural context. Yes, zero is a number which has the objective value, and the objective value is zero. But the connotation is completely different in my cultural context, the connotation with which you people live, or the Western world, or even the mathematicians live by. Like when I was very small, zero was a number which has no value. And we kept on going and going. But today, when I read my Indian thought system to understand the concept of the zero, I realize that it very clearly says that there is no distinction between the zero and infinity. And now I would like to make a statement in Hindi, Shunya hi ananta hai or ananta hi shunya hai. So many departments of philosophy, so many departments of mathematics, so many mathematicians, so many mathematical documents. I'm very happy NCF 2005 starts with very first word, mathematization of human mind. And it's not that only for the first time NCERT did. Earlier also it happened, but still that thing has not been realized. I'll conclude, Professor Pradhan, in 2 minutes, only 2 minutes. So kind of work that is required is this. And for that, a different kind of curricular structure, different kind of curricular practices, curricular policies, and how to implement that curriculum is required. I'm very happy to note, just like my younger brother, Manoj Saxena has just mentioned that they have introduced Indian knowledge system for all undergraduate and graduate students. He will be in a better position to recall that when we jointly we were offering our research methodology program to entire university, we introduced a concept of the philosophy of the research. Right? So it's a question, it's not the question how to incorporate or how to integrate, but rather how to contextualize. Only then something can happen. So friends, and for that, what is needed is to break the epistemic hegemony that is there in the world, and to break the unbreakable shield of epistemic hegemony. It is required at this juncture that first we provide opportunities to our learners to acquaint, to accept, and to realize at the realizational level the knowledge that is there in Indian thought system. You all know the kind of political game that happened between Newton and Leibniz. Both developed differential calculus simultaneously. But what happened? Leibniz's case was defeated in the court of the law in England. And today, the denotation that we use in the area of differential calculus, that is not given by Leibniz, a marvelous genius mind, but rather given by Newton. So this happens, the politics of knowledge and epistemic hegemony, how to do that. And that's the major challenge. With these words, I stop here. Thank you, Dr. Pradhan, for giving me this opportunity. Thanks to NERIE to give me this opportunity once again. Thank you so much. Thanks to the chair. Thanks to the chair.
Thank you, Professor Jha, for the extension of your previous lecture, and sometimes I find, I always also tell him, we have lots of discourse. I find some kind of, it appears to be paradoxical. Like he tries to just makes a cultural interpretation of mathematics and Nyaya philosophy with some logic, and he has also discussed about logical rationality, humanity, logic in our ancient literature, because he always interprets mathematics, what I find from our personal discourse, in the context of philosophy. As an author of Nyaya philosophy, he has just made a very nice integration or cultural interpretation of mathematics and philosophy. So with this, once again, I thank you, Professor Jha. Now I am happy to introduce my younger brother, Professor Ashish Srivastava, currently heading the Department of Education, Mahatma Gandhi Central University, Bihar. Prior to this, he has worked in a very reputed university, Central University, rather National University, International University, I can say, Vishwabharati, and also he has worked in different capacities in both the universities, in the capacity of Dean, Head of the Department of Education, Campus Director now, and Member of Executive Council, Member of Academic Council, Member of Planning and Monitoring Board of his current position, current university, and he is a member of several committees of the university prior to that also in Vishwabharati. And also he has received Maya Golden Foundation Award for excellence and services as a young academic leader in the year 2020 by Maya Gold Foundation, US. So Professor Srivastava has delivered many lectures. Somewhere we have also together delivered lectures. He's alumnus of University of Lucknow and Devi University Indore. Of course, we are alumni of Devi University. We have long association. He's the youngest in the series, youngest professor in the series of 7 professors, and that those who are in the panelists. With this brief introduction, I invite Professor Ashish Srivastava to just summarize or give the presidential remark and talk on integration of indigenous knowledge and language. I am not giving him time limit, but we should. Our time was 12:40. 12:40, but we can go up to 12:50 because he will be also giving presidential remark. I should not give limit to the chairperson of the session. Now over to you.
Thank you, Professor Pradhan, for this generosity. You had been a truly hard taskmaster today. Thank you so much for this generous gesture. So, thank you so much. At the outset, let me extend my sincere apology for not being able to present at this wonderful venue of NERIE-NCERT physically, because of certain administrative responsibilities at my university. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to the principal of NERIE-NCERT, and also I express my sincere gratitude and heartfelt thanks to one of the wonderful professors whom I love and admire a lot, Professor Subhash Chandra Roy, for giving me this learning opportunity. I would like to thank entire team of NERIE for having me invited and for this wonderful learning opportunity, I must say. And I must thank the generosity of Professor Pradhan for not restricting me into the time limits. I congratulate the NERIE for having conceived this much needed theme for 2 days national seminar. As we all are aware of National Education Policy 2020's expectations and its focus on creating balance between the Indian legacy and the 21st century needs, as well as focusing on sustainable development goals. We all understand national education policy because it is now more than 1.5 years. And in the beginning, Professor Pradhan has highlighted, clause-wise highlighted the spaces, the points, the intent, the content from national education policy where indigenous knowledge was highlighted. We all know because we have all heard all the 6 eminent stalwart educationists. We all know the Indian indigenous knowledge system is the local knowledge that is unique to a given society or culture. It is different from international knowledge that is generated by universities, research institutions, and private firms. I often quote Warren, who says indigenous knowledge is the basis for decision making at a local level. The decisions that are made locally have a bearing on agriculture, on healthcare provision, on food production, processing and preservation, education, as well as natural resource management. There are very many definitions we all are aware of. However, if you look at the national education policy, you can witness the kind of areas to be thought upon in time to come on a priority basis. For example, if you look at National Education Policy 2020, it says knowledge of India will include from ancient India and its contribution to modern India and its successes and challenges, and a clear sense of India's future aspiration with regard to education, health, environment, etc. And it further says these elements will be incorporated in an accurate and scientific manner throughout the school curriculum, which has already been shared by Professor Pradhan in the very beginning. And which says that in particular Indian knowledge systems, including the tribal knowledge, and indigenous knowledge, traditional ways of learning will be covered and included in across subjects, across disciplines, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, yoga, architecture, medicine, agriculture, engineering, linguistics, literature, sports, and many fields. So we can in this regard, a very important question comes in the mind that what we lose if we lose on indigenous knowledge. We all need to reflect it. Dear friends, I am fortunate enough to have a galaxy of well-known academicians, well-known and established educationists, stalwarts like Professor Arvind Jha, Professor Karnam Pushpanathan, Professor Sara Sinha, Professor Manoj Saxena, Professor Y. Shrikant, and Professor P.C. Agrawal, and the very hard taskmaster, the moderator of the session, Professor Nityanand Pradhan. We all have heard them, and you can realize that all the panelists ventured into their respective theme, starting with Professor Manoj Saxena, who shared on the role of indigenous knowledge and its role in protecting the protection in modern times, where he emphasized on indigenous knowledge in daily life, highlighted many concrete examples from daily life, for example, water conservation, followed by Professor Sara Chenaz's deliberation, who raised the concern, in spite of having so much advancement in knowledge, why do we need to integrate indigenous knowledge? Professor Sinha said how it can be integrated in teacher education. She also emphasized the importance of integrating. Complexity in integration was shared by Madam. Then followed by Professor P.C. Agrawal Sahab, who shared on integrating indigenous knowledge in science and mathematics. He shared mapping of NCERT book with all available literature in mathematics, emphasized on ancient legacy like nanotechnology being used long back and he recalled, as mentioned by Professor Arvind, he recalled Kanad, gave several analogy relating to ancient legacy to modern times, followed by a wonderful deliberation by Professor Pushpanathan, who shared on integration on indigenous technology and recalled the great comments of many great personalities like Will Durant, Albert Einstein, and others. He emphasized on retention of traditional knowledge. A dedicated effort to identify local knowledge was emphasized by Sir. Then Professor Pushpanathan Saab emphasized on a role of scientific knowledge and technological advancement may be used for validation of indigenous knowledge. Then he emphasized on the importance of documentation and dissemination, followed by the deliberation of Professor Y. Shrikant Saab, who shared a wonderful deliberation on indigenous pedagogy at primary school level, who shared emphasized the importance of indigenous knowledge in early days of a child, shared few obstacles, and what I like most, that he emphasized on validation through Western approval, which we need to overcome ASAP, as soon as possible. Shared several concrete examples. Importance of contextualization was mentioned by Professor Y. Shrikant. Then the last and the wonderful deliberation by Professor Arvind Jha sir, indigenous knowledge in Indian thought system and its implications for contemporary classroom, where Professor Jha highlighted many perspectives with concrete examples, highlighting the Nyaya philosophy and mathematics. Keeping in view the expectations of National Education Policy 2020, I'm sure that these deliberations are quite meaningful, having vast coverage and in-depth insights so far as the theme of the seminar, that is integration of indigenous knowledge in the school curriculum, prospects and challenges is concerned. So thank you so much, all the respected panelists, for your insightful deliberations. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. As told by moderator, as one of the panelists, I would like to focus upon indigenous knowledge and languages. My dear friends, my dear colleagues, it is a commonly acknowledged fact that language is the most important marker of pupils' identity. We also know that without language, there is no knowledge of oneself, since language itself is a carrier of culture. We also understand that there is so much hype and talk about the importance of indigenous knowledge system, but this hype, what I am personally saying, will soon die if the languages within which that knowledge is embedded are not elevated to the official status, to the business status. It is through language that a pupil's art and industry are best understood, since language is a carrier of history and the heritage that has accrued from the past. We also understand that language is a confidence builder, and it enables the speaker to look back at activities and achievements of the past and build on that past and be in a position to launch development initiatives. My dear friends, my dear colleagues, there is still a large-scale dismissal and disrespect for indigenous language and traditional knowledge based on the widespread belief that it contributes nothing to the development of knowledge, humanities, art, science, and technology. Scientists and scholars, the very people who strive to objectively preserve the world's knowledge, may regularly reject or misinterpret information. When knowledge does not take the scientific forms we have come to expect from academic research, it's rejected. But that's due to an unthinking bias about what value traditional knowledge has to offer. If it is not in the form of a scientific report or paper, but is delivered in the form of a story, it's regarded as unscientific and anecdotal folklore, no matter what new information is being conveyed. So, my dear friends, we are slowly learning how crucial traditional knowledge and language diversity is in the areas such as biological diversity, especially with the rapid decline of rare plant and animal life in unique ecosystem around the world, and we are worried of those things. Their unique properties have long been recorded by indigenous groups through their language. So if anyone had ever cared to look and listen, in many places, scientists are finding to their surprise that traditional knowledge is on a par with many scientific discoveries. As endangered languages die out, so do the unique discoveries their speakers have preserved across generations in their oral histories. But what does it mean when we accept traditional knowledge as a kind of science only after it's been compared with the contemporary scientific knowledge and processes and shown to be similar? Why is it that we don't just respect and trust the work of indigenous scholars, the researchers and the scientists who may present their work in a different form to the scientific conventions? As more researchers understand the value of different ways doing science, there may what I can say have been calls for there to be an integration of long disregarded indigenous knowledge into the academy's scientific process. Traditional knowledge often values a more nuanced, contextual, and holistic view of information from observation and thought, not just piecemeal experimentation or discrete individual components of a system. And therefore, it is very important for us to look at language as indigenous knowledge. We all understand clearly and categorically that indigenous knowledge is cultural knowledge, and it is enshrined and embedded in the indigenous languages of people. Language gives the owners of that language the right to name the world in the images that they best understand. The situation so far is unfortunate. In the world at large has to date been named by European languages. These have been imposed on most of the world's people as the international lingua franca in as far as trade, communication, and knowledge transmission is concerned. They are given prominence by the lie that they are, especially English, the world's most spoken languages. Any language, especially in the former colonized state, is considered vernacular and is said to be a language that is not at par with technology and cannot therefore be accepted. And this unfortunate scenario has been maintained by the governments as well as the societies. So what we have failed to see or chosen to ignore, I should say, is that language is a carrier of culture and is part of that culture. Culture is a people's way of life. It is an embodiment of their moral, ethical, and aesthetic values. And needless to mention here that such intentions need epistemological revisiting. In the morning and in the previous session, we all witnessed a wonderful speech by Professor Arvind sir on knowledge construction and the epistemological concerns. I'm sure it will be helpful for all of us in time to come. And therefore, taking National Education Policy 2020 as a reference point of change, we need to work upon it as proposed in today's seminar's theme. And one more thing I would like to highlight here, that this is the high time when we need to come out from copycat culture. In order to substantiate this statement of mine, I am reminding you here, and I'm sure you all must be knowing these things, World Commission on Environment and Development, whose the name of the report was Our Common Future, which was popularly known as Wetland Commission Report. And if you can recall that report, since this report has come in 1987, we all ran behind ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. And this ESD became a buzzword in the world of academia since then. But if you look back at the Indian heritage, 1,000 years back, it has been very expressed well and very well expressed in Ishopanishad, which says, Isa Vashya Midam Sarvam Yat Kincham Jagatyam Jagat En Taktena Bhunjita Magruduh Kasya Sudhyanam. We further know Sarve Bhavantu Sukhna, Sarve Santu Niramya, Sarve Bhadrana Pashyantu Ma Kashyatu Bhag Bhaveti. We also are aware of the famous sloka of Kathopanishad, which says, Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunuktu Sahaviryam Karvavahe, Tejashvina Vaditmasma Vidishvavahe. Meaning thereby is, may we both be protected, may we both be nourished, may we both work together with great energy, may our intellect be sharpened, let there be no animosity amongst us. What I mean to say is that both are equally important. Both means the teacher and the student are very important. And therefore, I'm highlighting here, we need to understand our legacy before entering into the copycat culture of Western countries, as mentioned by Professor Y. Shrikant very rightly. Then only indigenous knowledge integration can be made possible in true sense. I will be concluding by reminding here section 1.16 of Kothari Commission's report, which I often quote in all my deliberations, where Kothari Sahib is writing in section 1.16 that the naive belief that all education is necessarily good, both for the individual and for the society, and that it will necessarily lead to progress, can be as harmful as it is misplaced. And therefore, we need to understand the proper context. With these words, again, I congratulate NERIE-NCERT for this wonderful event. Again, I express sincere gratitude of mine to all the learned, well-established, well-known panelists. Thank you one and all for being with us. Thank you, Professor Subhash Chandra and Professor Pradhan, for this great learning opportunity. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Ashish Srivastava, for your nicely summarizing the presentation by other 6 panelists on the basis of your, I can say, your homework, and also integrating the contents of their presentation in your topic that you took up, that indigenous knowledge and language. And in fact, you have talked about very important idea, given an important idea that indigenous knowledge can be explored from the indigenous language. If you do not understand the language, indigenous language, then we cannot explore the entire indigenous knowledge. And as you have already rightly said, language is the vehicle of culture. So unless and until we, taking that into consideration, importance of language, we have a concept like language across curriculum. That means in order to understand science, in understand mathematics, we have to understand language, and particularly in a linguistic diversity, in a country with a linguistic diversity, also in a country when many languages are endangered, we have the important role to protect the languages, endangered languages, particularly endangered language means those tribal languages. So with this, I thank Professor Srivastava for agreeing to chair this session and nicely summarizing, and in addition delivering your topic, integrating your ideas. So I thank all the panelists, Professor Pushpanandam, other than the chairperson, Professor Srivastava, K. Pushpanandam, Professor Arvind Kumar Jha, Madam Sara Sinha, Professor P.C. Agrawal, Professor Y. Shrikant, and Professor Manoj Saxena for being with us throughout this session. As I find all the panelists are there, they have not left the meeting. I also thank the coordinator of this seminar, Professor Subhash Chandra Rai, for assigning this task to me and giving me this opportunity to introduce all these respected speakers. And I also thank Principal Professor Bhattakur in absentia. And I thank all the delegates coming from different parts of the country and in online and offline. And co-coordinator, she is also not there, Madam Sinha, and all the students of this institute. So with this brief thanks, because it is already time, I would like to thank once again all of you for making this panel discussion session a success. Once again, thanks to all the respected panelists and chairperson, Professor Ashish Srivastava.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Pradhan. Thank you.
How are you, Professor Shukant?
Good, ma'am. Good. How about you? Namaskar, Pradhan sir.
All well.
Namaskar. Dr. Abhinav is also there.
Thank you.
Can we speak Dr.
Very nice to stand up.
Manoj, can we see all of you?
Professor Arvind ji, आप हैं क्या?
Thank you. So please switch on your Professor K. Puspanandam is also there. Madam Sara Sinha, please unmute yes, Madam is there. So Manoj ji. Okay. So once again, thanks and namaskar to all of you.
Namaste.
Professor Jha, how are you? Namaskar. We can't hear you. Can't hear you again.
When are you coming? First of all, namaskar. Good to see you virtually.
Thank you so much.
When are you coming to Delhi?
Yes, I'll have to come in June.
Okay. Good. Definitely you will meet.
Very nice talk.
Good to hear you. So, can we say bye to each other now?
Vâng. Làm đúng không? Làm vậy được. Tắt lên mình ông cái giống vợ con. Học thôi.